Hello, and welcome to our webinar, America's Retirement Divide, How Black and Hispanic Workers Fall Through the Cracks. Thank you so much for joining this crucial discussion. My name is Heidi Shearholtz. I'm the president of the Economic Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that uses the tools of economics to advance reforms that serve working people, deliver racial justice, and help guarantee gender equity. You can watch a recording of this webinar and check out all our work at epi.org and follow us on social media at Economic Policy. This webinar also serves as the release of the Older Workers and Retirement Chartbook, which is a joint project with the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis at the New School, or SCEPA. We'll put a link to the Chartbook in the chat. The Chartbook was the brainchild of SCEPA director, longtime EPI board member, and my good friend, Teresa Ghilarducci, who had the crucial insight that not only do bad jobs lead to bad retirements, but also that retirement insecurity causes people to stay stuck in bad jobs. It's hard to negotiate better pay and working conditions when your employer knows you have no exit plan. The lead for this work was EPI senior economist extraordinaire and retirement security expert Monique Morrissey. The Chartbook was co-authored by Monique, SCEPA Associate Retirement Equity Lab Director Siavash Radpur, and SCEPA Research Associate Barbara Schuster. I'd like to give a big thanks to the RRF Foundation on Aging for their generous support for this project, and we especially want to thank RRF's Naomi Stanhouse and Ann Posner for their support and counsel. They really focus on supporting research that can be used to guide and motivate real change, and their insistence on that really molded this project. With their support and encouragement, we launched the Chartbook project a year ago with 2 virtual roundtables where advocates for older workers and seniors shared what they would find useful for us to include. And we're very grateful to the advocates who shared their expertise. Today's event will focus on Black and Hispanic workers who, due to the wide-ranging impacts of structural racism, are particularly disadvantaged in the labor market and ill-served by a retirement system that relies on employers to voluntarily provide benefits. One good thing is that Black and Hispanic families do have access to something that can be even better than an employer plan, Social Security, and we will hear more about the importance of that today. SCEPA Associate Retirement Equity Lab Director and Chartbook co-author Siavash Radpur, who I've already mentioned, will give you a preview of the Chartbook, and he will be followed by Teresa Ghilarducci, who will introduce and moderate an expert panel. But first, we are very privileged to kick off this event with remarks from Acting Social Security Commissioner Kilolo Kijakazi, who has long been a champion of social insurance and an expert on structural barriers confronting workers of color. In recognition of Dr. Kijakazi's work, the National Academy of Social Sciences recently named their graduate student fellowship after her, and we were thrilled that a former EPI intern, Howard University PhD student Felipe Juan, was one of the 2 inaugural Kilolo Kijakazi Fellows. Dr. Kijakazi has been acting commissioner of SSA since July 2021. She first joined SSA as Deputy Commissioner for Retirement and Disability Policy at the start of the Biden-Harris administration. From 2014 until she joined the agency in January 2021, Dr. Kijakazi was an Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute, and before joining Urban, she was a program officer at the Ford Foundation, where she focused her grant making on building economic security and incorporating the expertise of people of color into all aspects of the work. So without further ado, I will now turn things over to Dr. Kijakazi.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for your very kind introduction. And hello, everybody. I just want to make one correction. That was the National Academy of Social Insurance that very kindly named their fellowship program after me, which I was thrilled and really surprised at. I would also like to thank Teresa Ghilarducci for inviting me to speak today. Congratulations to you, Monique Morrissey, and your team at SCEPA and EPI on the release of the Older Workers and Retirement Chartbook. I'm pleased to kick off today's conversation on America's retirement divide, an area that, as Heidi said, has been a major focus of my work long before I joined SSA. Social Security is the bedrock of retirement security for most individuals and their families. It is one of the country's most successful social insurance programs and offers several protections that benefit workers and their families. These protections are especially important for African American and Hispanic workers and other workers of color. Social Security benefits typically make up a large share of total retirement and disability income for people of color and for women. Structural barriers contribute to the disparity in economic well-being, and these barriers include policies, programs, and institutional practices that facilitate the economic security and mobility of some groups while impeding that of others. Structural barriers in the labor market include discrimination in hiring and pay, resulting in greater insecurity for some workers, both during their work lives and in retirement. For example, compared with white workers, African American workers typically face higher rates of unemployment and lower wages at every level of education. And by this, I mean these labor market disparities are not explained away by differences in education. If we just compare workers with high school diplomas, African American workers experience higher rates of unemployment and lower wages than white workers. This remains true even when we compare African American workers with graduate degrees to white workers with graduate degrees. African American workers still experience higher unemployment and lower wages even after achieving high levels of education. Occupational segregation further exacerbates disparities in the labor market. Data show that people of color remain overrepresented in jobs with lower levels of pay and less access to employer-sponsored benefits like retirement savings plans. Jobs with limited access to pensions or benefits like paid leave and affordable health care contribute to lower income in retirement. Social Security's progressive benefit formula replaces a larger share of earnings for low-wage workers than for high-wage workers. For example, at full retirement age, the program currently replaces 77% of prior wages for a very low-wage earner compared to replacing about 27% of prior wages for a maximum wage earner. The progressive benefit formula helps to mitigate against poverty. Social Security also provides protection for family members. Children, spouses, and in some cases, former spouses receive benefits based on a worker's disability, retirement, or death. The program's automatic annual cost of living adjustment gives beneficiaries some protection against higher prices. In 2023, approximately 70 million beneficiaries will receive an 8.7% increase in their benefits. Social Security's cost of living adjustment lasts for as long as the worker lives and even contributes or continues for family members who receive survivors' benefits after the worker dies. When Social Security is included in measures of total wealth, the racial wealth gap between white and African American households is smaller. At the same time, Social Security was never intended to be the sole source of retirement income. It is part of the often mentioned three-legged stool, which includes pension income and savings along with Social Security. And since Social Security benefits are based on years worked and prior wages, labor market disparities drive differences in benefits. Disparities include physically demanding jobs that necessitate the retirement of some workers before their full retirement age. Very low wage earners who need to claim benefits before their full retirement age may be left in poverty. People facing retirement insecurity may have to juggle paying for food, rent, medicines, or basic needs. Many seniors who have limited income and resources turn to supplemental security income, or SSI, to pay for essential needs. Over half of the 2.3 million individuals aged 65 and older who received SSI also received Social Security benefits. Ongoing research, including the Chartbook, have sought to shed light on the economic and financial risk distributed disproportionately among workers of color. Filling data gaps will help with addressing disparities and advancing equitable outcomes for all communities. In line with President Biden's executive orders, we are working to expand our understanding of racial and ethnic disparities to help make informed, equitable policy decisions. Our Equity Action Plan and People Facing Barriers initiative seek to remove barriers that limit access to our programs and services, especially for the aged, children, people with mental illnesses, people experiencing housing instability, individuals with low income, and those with limited English proficiency. We are improving SSA's collection of race and ethnicity data as part of the Equity Action Plan. Collecting more data will expand our ability to evaluate how applicants and beneficiaries are faring under current policies or under potential changes. We recently published 12 tables in the annual statistical supplement on our website. The new tables provide data by race for beneficiaries for whom we have more complete data. Research plays an important role in identifying and addressing the historical and ongoing systemic nature of barriers for people that people are facing. We can develop and test solutions and work towards economic health and social equity for people of color, people with disabilities, and others who face barriers that prevent their full participation in our programs. The Retirement and Disability Research Consortium, funded by SSA, includes more than 20 research projects focused on disparities by race and ethnicity. To effectively address structural barriers that can contribute to inequitable outcomes by race and ethnicity, we must also gain perspective, insight, and expertise from scholars of color. In line with President Biden's executive order on advancing educational equity, excellence, and economic opportunity through historically Black colleges and universities, we are working to build partnerships with HBCUs as well as with Hispanic, American Indian and Alaska Native, and Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander serving institutions. Through these partnerships, we hope to engage in research projects with scholars from these institutions and to create a pipeline of graduates from these institutions from which we can recruit to SSA positions. Beyond research, we are focused on addressing barriers to accessing service. For example, we identified 1.4 million individuals who may be eligible for SSI because the Social Security benefits they are receiving fall below the SSI maximum payment amount. We started mailing notices in December of 2020. As a result of this targeted outreach, about 36,000 eligible individuals have been paid a current cumulative total of over $8.7 million in SSI benefits. The Social Security program has been adjusted over time to become more comprehensive, in response to the needs of workers and their families. However, the agency is facing challenges. For instance, the pandemic has contributed to increasing disability backlogs. And as a result of years of insufficient funding and hiring freezes, the agency hit its lowest level of staffing in 25 years in FY 2022. President Biden requested $14.8 billion for SSA in fiscal year 2023, and I have been meeting with members of Congress to press our need for these funds. The good news is that we received nearly $100 million above our fiscal year 2022 funding level while we are operating under a continuing resolution, which currently goes through December 16. This funding level means we do not have to cut overtime and continue hiring for now. But it is not sufficient to achieve the improved customer experience and employee experience we would all like to see. If we receive the president's full request of $14.8 billion for fiscal year 2023, it will allow us to hire throughout the year and restore our staffing to the levels needed to reduce backlogs and improve our services, and keep our IT modernization work on track. Providing SSA with adequate and sustained funding to carry out the essential work we do for the public is part of strengthening our retirement system to better address the challenges older workers and retirees of color are facing. Thanks again to EPI and SCEPA for producing this chart book and hosting today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kijakazi. Allow me to take about 5 minutes to introduce the chart book to everyone. Let me share my screen first. My name is Chartbook. I am the Associate Research Director at the Retirement Equity Lab at the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis. At the Retirement Equity Lab, we do research focused on older workers and retirement. You can visit our website to see more about academic research, as well as our reports on the status of older workers in the labor force. The chart book is a joint project between the Schwartz Center and Economic Policy Institute, funded by RRF Foundation and AG. SCEPA Research Associate Barbara Schuster and I had the privilege to co-author chart book with Monique Morrissey, who is a wonderful scholar and an amazing human being. It was a pleasure to work with her on this project. So why did we create this chart book? Our main objective was to create a tool for advocates, media, and policymakers where we can present them with reliable statistics on what's going on in the labor market for older workers and in retirement. We have put together 33 charts and gathered more facts and narratives from various sources in one place to create a hub and make access to these resources easier for everyone. We want to reframe the narrative around working longer and retirement. We want to present good jobs and improving access to decent jobs as a complement to retirement security rather than substitute. And we want to say that if workers have retirement security, they will get better jobs and they they will be empowered to choose if they want to work or if they want to retire. And as Heidi said, we started this project with a roundtable with collecting insights from experts and scholars. We try to include as much as we can in the Chartbook, but there are obviously gaps. This is an ongoing project, and we invite everyone to continue this conversation with us and help us filling these gaps and expanding the Chartbook. We have organized the charts in the Chartbook in 3 chapters. The first chapter, we talk about the conditions of older workers in the labor force. They face many barriers, they face many challenges, including working at jobs that are physically demanding and they don't have often control over how long they can continue working in any jobs, including these jobs with physical demands. I will just show you how the charts look like in general. This is a specific chart on physically demanding jobs. We show that almost half of older workers, mostly workers of color, are at jobs that are physically demanding. And this is not the jobs that we expect older workers to be at. Sorry, I said half. It's more than 40%. The second chapter focuses on the retirement and retirement system and how a voluntary employer-based do-it-yourself retirement system leaves more than half of employees in private sector without access to retirement plans, and how inefficient retirement tax incentives exacerbates inequalities in retirement and retirement wealth. The third chapter showcases some of the risks that older workers and retirees face: financial risks caused by health costs, long-term care, and economic downturns and job loss as we experienced during the pandemic. These are risks that older workers and retirees cannot self-insure themselves against, and we have to rely on an expanded and stronger social insurance system to deal with these risks. There are 3 themes that you can see throughout the Chartbook. The first one is that the relationship between retirement security and good jobs is a 2-way connection. So workers who have retirement security, who can walk out of bad jobs because they have an alternative, can negotiate for better working conditions. But workers who are in bad jobs and don't have retirement security are locked in those jobs. And at the same time, because they are not receiving retirement benefits, because they have low pay and have to claim Social Security earlier, that undermines their retirement security at the same time. So the connection is both ways. The second thing is that these failures are systemic, and we have to focus on fixing the systems rather than changing individual behaviors that won't be helpful. And the third thing is that the main story here is the story of disparities. Older workers and retirees, based on their gender and ethnicity, gender, race and ethnicity, and class, experience the system in very different ways. The system is designed to work for some, but not for all. As a result, we see this theme in the labor market and in retirement that the disparities exist and are not improving as much as we hope to. I will pass it to Teresa and to the panelists to talk more about this.
Yeah, exactly on that point. Sia, thank you very much. I want to move to Valerie Wilson, who's the Director of Program Race and Ethnicity at the Economic Policy Institute, to really hone in on those disparities you ended with, Sia. Valerie, your work for decades has been focused on the persistence of racial and ethnic disparities in the labor market. Can you give us a bird's eye view from that perspective on how these lifelong life course disparities end up leaving so many Black and Hispanic workers with bad jobs, dead-end jobs, physically demanding jobs, and also unable to retire on their own terms from those jobs.
Certainly, and thank you for that question, Teresa. I'm going to make a statement that I think really captures what the issue is here. And that is that large and persistent disparities in unemployment and earnings by race, ethnicity, and gender are defining features of the US labor market, not exceptions. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? Specifically, I think most people are familiar with the roughly 2-to-1 unemployment rate disparity ratio between Black and white workers. That ratio has existed for almost 7 decades. And it's a disparity that holds across multiple periods of economic expansion and recession. We observe it for all age cohorts at every level of education and for men and women alike. Additionally, since the 1980s, unemployment rates for Hispanic workers have also consistently been higher than those of non-Hispanic white workers. Even at the lowest levels of pre-pandemic unemployment, so looking at 2019, in each education category, Hispanic workers had higher levels of unemployment than similarly educated white workers. Regarding earnings disparities, racial and ethnic pay gaps persist even after we account for factors commonly associated with individual productivity, which is supposed to influence pay. And those gaps have gotten worse over the last 40 years. Now, again, just to sort of put this into context, less than half of the observed Black-white difference in average hourly wage is explained by differences in education, experience, or geography. So in other words, even after we control for all those factors, racial identity is still a significant predictor of pay. Black and Hispanic women face the sort of intersectional burden of race and gender, and we find that racial disparities in pay for Black and Hispanic women are among the largest relative to white men. It's also important to know that those pay gaps are not closed over the course of one's working years. So they start out with those gaps and they either worsen or remain over the course of one's work life. Now, in the context of an employer-based retirement system, those racial disparities in unemployment and earnings clearly carry over into racial disparities in retirement outcomes in probably some obvious ways. Lower wages mean less income from which to save for retirement, and higher rates of unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers means they are more likely to experience an income shock or a loss of income over the course of their working years. If fortunate enough to have some savings, retirement or otherwise, they're more likely to have to dip into those savings before retirement to make up for that loss of income. Now, in addition to the direct economic cost of having lower wages and higher rates of unemployment, these disparities also erode the bargaining power of Black and Hispanic workers, particularly in the context of the existence of equally or more attractive employment options. And this really gets to the point about being stuck in a bad job. In tight labor markets, that can help to boost workers' bargaining power, but that has been the exception rather than the norm over the last 4 decades. And in the absence of really tight labor market conditions, Black and Hispanic workers may find that they're less likely to leave a job or hold out for a better job in the case of a job search, or to challenge unfair or unsafe working conditions due to concerns about retaliation and losing that job. Additionally, undocumented workers are particularly vulnerable to wage theft and poor working conditions given their precarious legal status. And then on top of that, we add the issue of lower levels of household income and wealth that make the consequences of leaving or losing a job greater for Black and Hispanic workers. So when we get into retirement years, one of the things that's highlighted in the chart is this disparity in people actually having a retirement savings account at all. Only 15% of Hispanic households, about 21% of Black households age 65 or older have a retirement savings account at all. That's compared to about 48% of white households. The value of those household retirement savings is also significantly different. The median balance for a Black household, again, age 65 or older, is just under $39,000. It's about $41,000 for Hispanic households and about $150,000 for white households. Now, I want to be clear, that's sorely inadequate for anybody. none of those are great numbers when we're looking at what it will take to maintain a reasonable standard of living in retirement. But the disparity, the difference across racial and ethnic groups is significant. Dr. Kijakazi also already talked about the importance of Social Security as a bedrock of retirement security, especially for Black workers, given the broad coverage and the progressive benefit structure. So given the success of Social Security, I think it's really important that we strengthen and expand the Social Security program. But it's also important to address those labor market disparities that have such a significant impact, not only during working years, but beyond. That can include workers having access to or the ability to join labor unions and collectively bargain. Labor contracts, by definition, minimize discriminatory outcomes. Then we also need to strengthen enforcement of anti-discrimination laws and really prioritize full employment so that we're more often in those tight labor markets that increase bargaining power.
Thank you, Valerie. And exactly nailed it for the next speaker, who is Nari Ree, an old friend and a protein researcher in the area, especially related to what you just said, Valerie, on the disparity in access to these really valuable workplace retirement plans. Nari, how bad is this access disparity and what are the reasons behind it?
Yeah, so I want to sort of step back and talk about the nature of the U.S. retirement system, that we have a universal system called Social Security, and then we have a voluntary system at the firm level, right? Employer-sponsored retirement plans. And so there are big gaps both within and outside the system that intersect with labor market segregation to produce very disparate outcomes. So there's as you have data for in your report, there's an inverse relationship, or I'm sorry, there's a correlation between the wages of a sector, right, by occupation or industry, and whether or not they offer retirement benefits in a given firm. And you take that, basically employers are offering plans, right, as sort of an employee retention benefit. And there's a set of incentives for them on whether or not they offer a retirement plan that doesn't necessarily serve the goal of universal coverage. And at the same time, there are big gaps outside of the employer-sponsored retirement system. So that system is really built around the idea of a stable firm-employee relationship. And it structurally leaves out and basically throws up regulatory hurdles for covering workers who fall outside of that, whether they're part-time or seasonal workers, they're bona fide employees, but they're not in stable jobs, or they might be self-employed or independent contractors or gig workers or domestic workers, right? And a lot of these exclusions happen in sectors with historically large concentrations of workers of color, right? Especially women of color, particularly in the care economy, right? And domestic work. So I want to turn a little bit towards some of the distinctions between the Black community and the Latino Hispanic community in terms of sort of labor market dynamics and retirement plan coverage at work. So what the two communities have in common is, particularly in the private sector, concentration in low-wage jobs. They fare a lot better in the public sector, partly because of wage compression, right? There's less wage inequality in public sector jobs. Workers at the bottom get paid more relative to their education. Workers at the top get paid less, but they're compensated with a secure pension. And so what's happening is that for the Black community, public employment and public sector retirement benefits, particularly defined benefit pensions, are the bedrock of retirement security for those that actually have any retirement security. So to give you an example, for among US retirees, controlling for income a little bit more than $5,000 in Social Security benefits, less than $5,000 in earnings, right? To take some of those differences off the table. Black seniors without a pension are only 41%, right, are above 200% of the federal poverty level. And that probably doubles to 82% when you look at Black seniors with any kind of pension income for themselves or for their spouse. Latinos also experience a similarly large boost. So defined benefit pensions lift all boats, right? It's good for every community, but it has particularly big impacts for Black and Latino communities. So another point I want to make about Latinos and Hispanics is that there's just a bunch of factors that lead to worse outcomes, right? Less time on Social Security. If you're undocumented, you're not in the system. You might be paying into it, but you're not going to collect benefits. Other things like home ownership, right? Access to asset building opportunities. Even the state auto IRA programs that are proliferating right now, to the extent that they try to make room for undocumented immigrants through the use of ITINs for enrollment, it just turns out that less than half of undocumented workers have an ITIN. They're actually not that easy to get, not to mention sort of linguistic barriers. And so it turns out that the programs are actually having a hard time getting undocumented workers to participate even when they want them to. So the Hispanic community is also underrepresented in public sector jobs. So they're not getting as much benefit out of those defined benefit pensions as they could. But at the same time, rates for workplace retirement coverage in the private sector are so low that the share of workers with any kind of retirement benefit across sectors that are in public sector plans is double the share of Latinos in public sector jobs. So again, this shows that even for Latinos who are underrepresented in the public sector retirement benefits still play a key role in retirement security. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, so maybe I will leave it off there. Yeah, thanks.
And that was a good place to end, Nari. Thank you. Very efficient explanation. I wanted to turn to Ismael. Ismael Cid Martinez, an economist and a senior policy analyst at the United States Joint Economic Committee. His committee has been laser focused on the fate of older workers, especially in the light of the last couple of years, the pandemic and the recession induced by the pandemic. And Ismael, your committee, especially the hearings that you had earlier this year, really focused on the challenges that older workers faced during these last 2 years, and especially the disparities among older workers. Can you tell us a bit about that research that you did before the hearings and the outcome of those hearings?
Thank you, Teresa, for this great question. And I want to first start by congratulating you all on this important work and to thank you for the kind invitation. I want to also start by noting that my views here are my own and not a reflection of the JEC or its members, right? But one of the first things that became clear is that older workers were disproportionately hurt by the pandemic recession. Now, in typical contractions, older workers are less likely than mid-career workers, those between the ages of 35 and 54, to lose their jobs. This is due in part to their work experience and the seniority of older workers that shelters them. But this recession was unusual. It was unusual in the sense that older workers, those 55 and older, suffered higher job losses than a lot of these mid-career workers. Between March and April of 2020 alone, more than 5 million older workers lost their jobs. These job losses were especially pronounced among older workers of color and those with less education. Now, the employment situation of these workers is stronger today, and some of the older workers that left the labor force have now returned. And this is a result of pro-worker policies that help jumpstart the labor market recovery. But what we learned is that the experience of older workers during the pandemic was emblematic of some of the structural challenges that they face in the labor market. Some of these challenges can be grouped into at least 3 buckets. In the first, I like to include age discrimination. The second relates to challenging working conditions. And Sia alluded to this, the increasingly more physical work and dangerous work that older workers are doing. And lastly, there's the issue of diminishing returns to experience and growing retirement insecurity. Let me say a few words about each of these, and then I promise to talk about policy solutions later if time permits. Now, Age discrimination. This continues to be a challenge for older workers. In 2020, about 78% of older workers reported either directly experiencing or observing age discrimination in their jobs. This marks an increase from the 61% of older workers that reported a similar experience in 2018. Now, for older workers of color and women, age discrimination worsens the disadvantage that they already face in the labor market. Then there's the issue of work becoming increasingly more physical and dangerous. Sia alluded to the physicality of that work and how Black and Hispanic workers are more likely to experience this type of job situation. But the truth is that work has also grown more dangerous for older workers. While overall deadly occupational injuries declined between the early 90s and 2017, fatal injuries for older workers, those 55 and older, increased by more than 50%. And these conditions represent additional obstacle to older workers with health, mobility, and other challenges and difficulties. Now, lastly, there's this issue of diminishing returns to experience. Wage growth for today's older workers has been slower than that of previous generations. One reason for this is that the returns to each additional year of work experience fell by about half between 2000 and 2016. This reality, along with the erosion of unions and growing retirement insecurity, means that older workers have less leverage in wage negotiations than they did decades ago. And these insecurities limit their economic agency in deciding when to retire or to continue working. Now, while this list is by no means exhaustive, it also offers a sense of some of the structural challenges that shape the labor market experience of older workers. And I'm happy to continue with policy solutions later if time permits.
Just take another 30 seconds, Ismail. What are your highlights?
Beautiful. So on age discrimination, I'm thinking existing congressional proposals that strengthen the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. This can help protect older workers. And when we think about challenging working conditions, legislative proposals that look to strengthen the power of workers to unionize and bargain for better working conditions, this can help improve the work needs and safety of older workers. When it comes to diminishing returns to experience, raising the federal wage floor can mark an initial step in dealing with this and other earning disparities in the labor market. When it comes to retirement insecurity, addressing disparities in terms of access will require a more universal retirement savings vehicle that can help expand access more broadly. And then there's the peculiar needs of older workers mean that they also demand specific policy attention. An Older Workers Bureau within the Department of Labor can help us continue to study the diverse needs of these workers, their impact on the broader economy, and the steps that we can take to broaden economic equity and participation across the life cycle.
That was well worth it. Thank you. And last, we'll turn to Tracy Goniger, who I've learned so much from, especially the last 2 years, Tracy. She is the managing director of the Economic Security Team of a very aptly named organization called Justice in Aging. Tracy, among other things, you've looked at how a particular outcome of our retirement income security system that we've talked about, and that is poverty. Just de facto poverty among the elderly, the only group who suffered more poverty in the last poverty report than any other groups. Can you talk more about the risk of poverty for all of us who work for a living, and especially the disparity in those risks?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Yes, Justice in Aging does focus our advocacy work on low-income older adults, and especially around groups that have historically been marginalized. And so that would include women, people of color, LGBTQ individuals, among others. And one group that I wanted to focus on today, and that people have also touched on, are older adult women of color who have significantly higher poverty rates compared to men and white women. As Valerie mentioned, seniors of color overall have higher rates of poverty compared to their white counterparts. But I think that looking at the older adult women of color is really important, because you can see kind of those compounding effects of the multiple types of systemic discrimination that they're facing. So including sex and gender discrimination, as well as racial discrimination. And we see a number of reasons why older adult women are more likely to age into poverty than men. And I wanted to just focus on a few categories today to highlight, since we have limited time. But I wanted to talk about income and savings, and then also the responsibilities of caregiving. There are other things like higher healthcare costs, for example, which women face as they live longer than men on average and have over their lifespan significantly higher costs in healthcare. But that's like a whole nother area that we could get into. But talking kind of about income and savings and thinking about that, on the income side, we know that there's a pay gap, and we know that women make less compared to men for the same jobs. And as Valerie mentioned, when you look at women of color, it's even more extreme and the disparities are even more significant. There's also the fact that among kind of jobs that are viewed as women's jobs, those jobs are paid less. And so women are being paid simply because the system has deemed certain types of work women's work and undervalues them. So that's another piece of kind of those income disparities. Another piece of it is that when you look at the low-wage workforce, the majority of those workers are women, and a disproportionate percentage of those low-wage workers are women of color. And so when you're talking about low-wage workers in general and the challenges that they're facing, the majority of those people that you're talking about are women. And I think that that's something people should keep in mind as they're thinking about, fairness and inequity in terms of low-wage workers. And as Valerie mentioned, the difference in income and the issues around low-wage work means that people don't have the money to put away for emergency savings and for their retirement. And even if they do have access to retirement accounts, they may not have enough money to contribute to it in any meaningful way. And so that's a big issue. The other big factor that I wanted to talk about as it relates to primarily women, but all people who are in this position is caregiving. Women are the primary caregivers, not only of children, but also adult parents, can be spouses or other relatives. And the cost of that caregiving can be financially difficult for anybody who takes on that role. This is also an issue in the LGBTQ community, where people are more likely to rely on kind of that found family and providing assistance that is less likely to be around for people who may have had children to help them with that caregiving role. And so that's another kind of area of discrimination, or an area that we need to think about in terms of inequity. Oftentimes this caregiving means that people have to take time off of work or take more flexible jobs that are more likely to pay less or have fewer benefits. It can also mean people having to leave the workforce entirely for periods of time, which not only affects their current income, but can also affect, as we've talked about, their ability to save for the future. And it also affects their Social Security benefits when they retire, because those benefits are based on the wages that are credited from credited jobs for a 35-year period. So every year that you're not working lowers your benefit level in retirement. And Social Security, as Acting Commissioner Kijakazi mentioned, is really important. It lifts millions of people out of poverty, including 16 million older adults. So for people who are only getting the minimal Social Security benefits, there's supplemental security income, and over 2/3 of older adults who receive SSI are women. That amount is not enough to lift a lot of people out of poverty. The program itself needs updating, and it really does not quite give people the ability to have economic security. So it's something that is an area for improvement that could really benefit caregivers and other low-income older adults. And then I guess the last thing that I'll say is, well, two more things. One is that the chart books are really helpful. You can really see some of the causes and the results of the inequities and in the data that's in the chart book. And you can see the differences in the rates of access and participation in retirement plans. You can see older adults of color participating less in certain types of retirement savings plans because they're working in industries where the pay is low or where they don't have benefits. And we also see those median account balances. I noticed this, I thought it was really striking for single older adult women and people of color. Those median accounts were a fraction of those of men and white seniors and couples in general. So I think that it really was helpful to have in the chart book some of those really kind of hard data points to show the disparities. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll say, if I can say one more thing, is that this is something that we're going to see continue to happen. I think that some of the thoughts that people have around, well, things are getting better and now women are going to have, an equal playing field and it's all going to be great, are based on kind of a misunderstanding. These systems are structures that have been in place for a long time and they're still acting today. We're still not paying women enough. We're not paying low-wage workers sufficiently. We're not providing sufficient access to caregivers. We're not offering the support that we need to offer. And so we're going to continue to see these problems arise again and again, unless we make real changes to the system so that they're not kind of keeping people in this place of economic insecurity. And I will stop there because I don't want to go too far over.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to all the panelists for really drilling down on the racial and ethnic disparities and the gender disparities, and basically the role of marginalism, in coverage. But also thank you, Tracy, for really pointing out that we are launching the Chartbook today, and that the Chartbook is supposed to help everybody with your particular narrative. It's supposed to be a one-stop shopping place for those of you who are filling out and developing your own narrative on policy or just understanding. And in closing, I would like to focus our attention and give over the floor to the person who made this possible, this one-stop shopping place for your all the facts you need, and that is Naomi Stenhouse, a longtime funder and inspirer in our space. She is the Retirement Research Foundation, RRF Foundation's lead for the aging program. She's a consultant and she's also the founder of this project for the RRF. Naomi, can you please close us out and give us a direction?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we are so honored to partner with SCEPA and Economic Policy Institute on this really important project, this important tool. I think we heard so much valuable information, particularly around the challenges of a broken and failed system for older workers. And I'd say for workers of all ages who bring these disparities into old age. So this is a big tent, not just a tent for older workers. But we heard a lot about the challenges. Our hope is that the Chartbook will bring aha moments to those who don't already have them, give us data and ammunition to promote policies that will improve the situation. So this is a do and action research project, emphasis on action. I hope we come away with actually some of the tools that might promote the Older Workers Bureau, because we need a place that spotlights the issues in a cohesive, collaborative way and brings resources to the issues. So again, we're honored to partner with you. We hope, and I hope it's in the chat, we hope you'll go to our website and look at both our issue brief on retirement, on economic security, as well as our new call to action to curb debt among older people. We want to hear from you. We want to partner with you. And we thank you very much for a thought-provoking and action-provoking session. Safe travels, happy Thanksgiving. And I think, Teresa, does that close us out?
That closes us out. The link to the Chartbook is in the chat. Thank you very much. Goodbye.